Hi, welcome to today's webinar. I'm Michael Conway of Renaissance, and this is a webinar with our partners Centripetal, and it's talking about defending the internet, the era of intelligence. I'll read that correctly yet, and embracing intelligence-powered cybersecurity with Centripetal. This webinar, we want to make it as valuable to you as possible and as interactive as possible. So but we would like everybody to try and get involved. We want to make sure that we give you the right answers to the questions and really give you the most value out of this. I'm delighted to be joined by Conor O'Brien, who is Regional Manager from Centripetal, and Fergal Lyons, who's Senior Product Marketing for Centripetal, and Chris Hanscom. I'll get all these names right. Apologies for the tongues at this stage. But without further ado, I want to pass on to Fergal, who's going to kick on and take us through the session. So thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much, Michael, for the kind introduction. So yes, my name is Fergal Lyons. I'm Director of Product Marketing here at Centripetal. I'm coming to you from our Galway office. We are a US-based company. Most of the team is based over there, but we have a significant team here in Galway. We established an office here about 1 year ago, and happy to be working with Renaissance in the Irish market. So today I'm going to talk about intelligence-powered cybersecurity. Let's start out though with some numbers. This is a challenge. This is the global challenge. Today, cybercrime is costing the world 10.5 trillion annually, which is an absolutely mind-numbing number. In fact, I went back to the sources this morning just to double check and make sure that these were absolutely correct. When you think of the world GDP, in fact, it's about 100 trillion. So cybersecurity, the impact of cyber threats and the costs related to that, it represents about 10% of the world economy. And quite simply, it shows no sign of stopping. And in fact, it's expected to hit 13 trillion by 2028. So yes, it's actually significantly bigger than the international drug trade. The next number there is the 3,000 new vulnerabilities per month. In fact, in January, it was 3,116 new vulnerabilities. It's doubled, in fact, from about 2020. So the actual rate of new vulnerabilities being discovered has doubled in space of about 3 to 4 years. What this shows really is the overall fragility of the software that runs our businesses, that runs our governments, that runs our personal lives. The software that's out there is rampant with vulnerabilities, and everywhere there's a vulnerability, there's a potential for cyber criminals to exploit those and to impact whether it's our personal lives or our businesses. Then the next thing we look at there is the decreasing time to exploit, or TTE. So this is from when the vulnerabilities are being discovered to when they're being exploited, averaging about 32 days. But in many cases, of course, they're being exploited well before then. But what's important to note is that the time to exploit is decreasing. And the average cost of a data breach, 4.45 million. This is impacting whether it's in the form of ransomware, in the form of the value to your business, cost to remediate, whatever it might be. The average cost of a data breach, 4.5 million. Overall, when you look at the general picture here, as an industry, we are failing to keep up with the cyber criminals. They're staying one step ahead. We're lagging. We're coming out with all these new great technologies, but in fact, the cyber criminals are more effective at getting around the different barriers we put in place, and they're staying ahead in terms of impacting the vulnerabilities that are highlighted. So let's look at the evolution of cybersecurity and the evolution of the internet itself, how that happened over the last, what we're talking now, probably 40 odd years. When in the first generation, shall we say, of cybersecurity and of the internet, it was just the internet backbone. There really wasn't very much. This was basic connectivity between systems. In truth, it was wide open. This was mostly academic networks between universities. It was considered low risk, and for that reason, there was a low emphasis on security. Systems anywhere could talk to anywhere else. That was the real attraction of it, in fact. And then we move on to the second generation. This is where we had the introduction of firewalls. This is where we determined that we needed to partition the network to define zones of access, intranets, extranets, and achieve greater control in terms of determining who could access what assets. But this was the beginnings of cybersecurity in terms of structuring the network. The next phase then was intrusion detection, or IDS. This is where we started to look at, well, what is the traffic going across these networks, and can we identify malicious activity, whether it be known bad files or attack signatures. So these signatures were the key to this generation of cybersecurity. Very challenging, because as the network speeds grew, these IDS devices and IPS devices really struggled to keep up. Then we had a switch to endpoints. All the focus started to go on endpoints. In fact, we started to hear messages from some of the cybersecurity companies that the perimeter is dead. And there's some truth in that, the notion that the perimeter itself is less important because there's so many remote workers, and we have so much cloud-centric activity now. The traditional perimeter is dead. But I think ignoring the perimeter is perilous, to be honest. So, but the emphasis did move to endpoints, more onto protection, detection of threats. We came across these EDR and XDR type of technologies, which we're seeing still today. And these are important. You definitely should protect the endpoint, but on their own, they're quite isolated. The fact is, none of these technologies have managed to stem the tide of malware and threat actors. In fact, it's got significantly worse. We're seeing a lot more monetized attacks now, ransomware, extortion, etc. The hackers are in this for the business, for the most part. And just like fighting a war, intelligence is key. I don't mean how smart you are, but what you know about your enemy. The equivalent of military intelligence is threat intelligence, knowledge about the threats that are impacting the connected world. And let's be clear, forms of intelligence have been used for some time. IDS signatures, they're a form of threat intelligence, and virus definitions, as used by the endpoint security solutions, they're also a form of threat intelligence. And some next generation firewall solutions use threat intel to power some automated rule generation. But here's the fact, it's time to go all in. There are nearly 300 threat intelligence vendors who deliver quality, timely information using a wide variety of techniques. Most companies out there won't subscribe to more than one or two threat intel feeds, which gives them a very limited view. And in most cases, they use that intel in a passive or even reactive way, looking up information to add context and color to what they're seeing in their event logs. But our approach to it is to use this threat intelligence to genuinely protect the network, protect the customers, protect businesses. And we can show you how effective that is. But the reality is, if used effectively, threat intelligence could have been used to stop at least 95% of cyber attacks. The information was out there. Somebody, somewhere knew something. And so this information just needed to be applied in a preventative manner to block the attacks before they happened. And this information, the actual data that's used to categorize this is what we call indicators of compromise, or IOCs. So let's dig down on that just a little bit. So what is an indicator of compromise? So typically, we're talking about URLs, we're talking about files on systems, we're talking about domain names, we're talking about IP addresses, an awful lot of IP addresses. And we're talking in some cases about geographical data, especially when we know that the source of these of the malware, these hackers, is coming from non-trusted geographical locations. And we also have IDS rules. So we have about 74,000 rules in our Suricata instance that scan as well. So this is all the information. These are the main categories of IOCs that we track. And these can be operationalized and applied to the data feeds. I'll describe more about that. So this is a huge amount of information. It's derived from many different sources. It's processed using big data techniques and artificial intelligence. And what we do is we identify the highest fidelity and the most reliable data and use that to power the filtering capabilities within our clean internet solution. So now this next slide is a bit of an eye chart, but what I want to highlight here is that the IOCs, the indicators of compromise that I just mentioned, this threat intelligence we collect, process, and apply, this represents real-world entities. Most typically, these are cyber threat organizations and malicious actors. So if you look at this diagram here, this is our radar diagram. On the left-hand side, you'll see the names of a lot of what we term APTs, advanced persistence threats. These are typically state-sponsored. These are coming from locations such as Russia and China, where these governments have motivations to attack infrastructure globally and to glean information from them. They are the source of a lot of the cyber threats. And places like North Korea, of course, use ransomware to generate funds to in fact drive their nuclear activities. There's an article, in fact, in the paper today just about that. They work hand in hand. Now, these APTs work hand in hand with the threat actor groups. The threat actor groups are primarily here for commercial purposes. They are driven from financial objectives. And many of these that you see listed here have been involved in significant ransomware campaigns. In the last couple of years, you'll see Klopp here and Conti. Conti was the one involved, I believe, in the HSE one here. Klopp were involved in the attacks on the casinos in Las Vegas. Scattered spider prevalent across the board in a wide variety of different ransomware attacks. And then as we work our way around the radar here, we look at malware toolkits, the toolkits that are used by these threat actor groups to perform their tasks. And these toolkits are run just like software operations. They have manuals, they have updates, they have product managers, they have marketing teams, just like we do. And they're run as businesses, providing the tools that the threat actor groups can use to deliver their malware. Then down the left-hand side here, we've malwares and we have vulnerabilities. This is a very small subset of these, as you can well imagine. But these are actually some of the malware instances that we observed in our customer and attempting to get into our customer sites over the last quarter in Q4. We're specifically tracking a number of very high impact vulnerabilities such as Citrix Bleed, Ivanti, and so on, and Move It, which I'll talk about more in just a moment. So these are all the entities, these are all the activities that are on our radar from Centripetal's perspective. But what we track day to day are in fact the IOCs, which I mentioned, and all of these come from our threat intel providers. So Centripetal itself is not a threat intel provider. We don't generate threat intel for the most part. We pull our intel from a range of expert providers across the entire globe. And they use an array of different techniques to gather their data. And it's the consolidation of these sources that brings strength to our solution. In fact, we estimate that there's only about a 3% overlap between threat intelligence sources. So if you're depending on just one or even a few threat intel sources, you don't really have an accurate picture. So, we in fact pulled from 241 different threat intel providers. We in fact were the largest consumer of threat intel on the planet. We pulled so much threat intel and we consolidated. We get about 112 billion different IOCs, indicators of compromise. But we whittled those down. We reduced them down to the ones that we can use effectively in our in our enforcement technology. And this happens continuously in real time. And that's why this is the engine really that drives our solution and makes it quite unique in the market. The reality is that if any of our threat intel partners identify a new source of malware or threat infrastructure, we immediately process that as soon as it's published, and we deliver it to our rule gates, which are our enforcement points in the customer network. That happens within 15 minutes. So that's 15 minutes from detection anywhere in the world to protection in your network. So 15 minutes from discovery to action time. And this all depends on this massive filtering engine that we have within our technology. And this is typically about 1,000 times more effective than anything you would see in typical firewall, IDS, IPS type technologies. It runs at just a phenomenal rate. So let's dig down a little bit more on Clean Internet itself. So looking at this slide here, I'll kind of walk you through this diagram. What you see from the top, this is the cyber threat intelligence feeds. So this comes from our team that's gathering all this threat intel, feeding it down the 10 billion IOCs that I mentioned. And this is used to basically create this database of content that the rule gates or the enforcement points leverage. So traffic coming into the network from left to right here is checked against the entirety of this threat intel. And if it triggers, then it'll be shielded, blocked, or maybe just logged, depending on the confidence. And this results in a clean internet feed arriving into the customer network with all the malicious packets of data stripped out. You can see there's a firewall there coming into the customer network, and the firewall still has a role to play. We're not a replacement for a firewall, but the firewall is no longer overwhelmed by this avalanche of bad traffic. It's important to note that for every breach you read about in the media, there were firewalls in place. They just weren't effective at blocking the malicious activity. Firewalls are good for partitioning your network. They're good for defining points of access and creating zones, but they get overwhelmed if they have too many rules that they need to apply, and that's why taking the burden off them is a very good thing to do. Said also for outbound traffic originating within the customer site, we also filter and shield the communication against any known bad destinations. So let's say, for example, an employee's PC may become infected when they brought it to a local coffee shop. And then when they come back into the corporate network, that infection attempts to communicate with a command and control server, which would typically result in further propagation of the threat across your network. But because we block the outgoing traffic to the known malicious infrastructure, we effectively neutralize the malware and stop it being effective in any way. So additionally then, we scan for suspicious traffic, for files that might be attempting to evade the cyber defenses. These tend to be the more complex and targeted advanced threats. So we log traffic and security events, and we apply our probable cause technology to help identify patterns, and our cyber analysts oversee this. They do the threat hunting within our customers' environments. They work with the customer's own cyber threat teams and together they help to identify and resolve any issues. And that's where you see this reporting activity down at the bottom. Typically, we issue weekly or monthly reports to our customers and let them know what we're seeing in their network, things they need to be aware of, recommendations for actions, and also recommendations for changes to the policies that we have in place for enforcement within their network. So that's kind of an overall perspective on what clean internet looks like. So let's drill down and say, well, show me this in like, how effective is this? So let's look at this particular CVE, which you're all probably quite familiar with. This was the MOVEit vulnerability and an attack that had such a significant impact across so many companies over the last, it's over a year now. So it's coming up to a year, in fact. So in this graph, I'll show you a few different things. Down the left-hand side is the percentage of IOCs, where 100% was the IOCs that were known when the CVE was published. So the CVE was published on June 3rd. That's the day that we kind of start and we look forward and we look backward. So that was the day when we were aware of 100% of the active IOCs for this particular threat. But in fact, we were aware of activity on these IOCs prior to that date. And we were shielding, we were blocking traffic that was attempting to access MOVEit systems well prior to the June 3rd date, because that's the date it was published. But remember, the hackers were already aware of it and were exploiting it long before that. This was a genuine zero-day type of attack. So at this point, the vulnerability is known and it's being actively exploited. But then what happens next is there's this massive surge of threat actors trying to get in on this as well. Basically, the CV has been published. They've said there's a vulnerability here. And everyone else goes, oh, let me try and see if I can attack that. There were proof of concepts that were published. So anyone who wanted really could, if they put the effort in, they could start attempting to attack this this same vulnerability. So the number of IOCs accelerated enormously. All of a sudden, you have 4 times as many IOCs to be concerned about. So what do? Because we have these feeds of threat intel coming from all these different sources. They're operating in real time. We're converting them into IOCs and actionable intelligence and feeding them down to our rule gates as well. So this incremental protection, this is what is achieved with Clean Internet. We were providing protection immediately to our customers on publication by any of our threat intel sources. This meant that not only were we providing protection before the CVE was published, like I mentioned, but we continued to do so highly effectively in all the days and the most peak days afterwards. And we continue to provide that protection today. This is the story from MOVEit. We can draw a very similar graph for Atlassian Confluence, for Log4Shell, for any of the big vulnerabilities that you might be aware of that are out there impacting customers today. We provide protection before the vulnerability is published and continue to provide protection afterwards. And this really shows the power and the impact of applying threat intelligence effectively at the point of ingress into their network. Oh, there's one more point I just wanted to make there before I leave this slide. And the lower section there, that really shows the coverage of a typical next generation firewall. So if you take a firewall, yes, they might be blocking 1 or 2 of the IOCs. Once the CV gets published, of course, they can update their list at that point, or the user of the firewall can update their list of blocked sites. But in fact, it is a much more manual process And where there is automation, it's automation in a much more limited sense. Typically because most firewalls, while they might have a threat intel feed, it's a threat intel feed from one single source. It doesn't have the huge range of sources that we have. And that's why there's such a delta between the lower section and the upper section, which is showing the protection achieved with clean internet. Okay, so ultimately, what problems does this solve? So the first thing is what I was just talking about there, the vulnerability mitigation. So with clean internet deployed in your network, you achieve a preemptive protection. Protection even before the vulnerability is known. So before, and that's also before you start applying patches. It might take, 30 days is actually pretty much average from when a vulnerability is disclosed to when most companies get around to patching that. If you can have a defensive solution in place during that patch, that would be patched period, then that provides you a much higher level of confidence that you're not going to get attacked. So preemptive protection before the CV is published, and then protection up until when you manage to get around to patching. This is all driven off intelligence, like we mentioned. The next thing then is threat detection. So we do our proactive shielding, blocking threats as they come into the network, but then we do a much more sophisticated and elaborate threat monitoring, where we leverage our analysts, we leverage a lot of different technologies, we analyze the security events that are that are coming from your network. We do an overall oversight to determine what's going on and monitor for threats. The next thing we do is event suppression. In some ways, this is the most impactful of the capabilities that we have. There's a huge amount of reconnaissance traffic hitting your network every single day, every minute of every day. Most of that is malicious. Some of it is benign, but most of it is just these hackers just pinging constantly, trying to see what's out there, trying to get a sense of what vulnerable systems are out there that they could possibly attack. It's a huge amount of traffic. And whether it is benign or malicious, shielding it from your network provides enormous value. And we shield it because we know the IOCs, we know the sources, we can block it with very high confidence. And as the sources change, we move with it. So as new sources of reconnaissance traffic emerge, we block those too. This eliminates a massive amount of noise in your network. How much noise? We actually see the numbers. Like we get reports from our rule gates here on a daily basis, and it actually removes between 95 and 99% of the traffic hitting your network. Now, some of that will be filtered out by your firewalls also, but in fact, the vast majority gets passed. So simply deploying clean internet rule gate in your network reduces the burden on every single system downstream from there. This is noise elimination, but also this is attack surface reduction. So if the hackers cannot see systems within your network, then they can't attack it. They basically give up. They go, no, there's nothing there. So reducing your attack surface is one of the massive benefits that you get from clean internet. One more aspect to consider is, like with this event suppression, we're collecting all of these security events within the network as well. So we're acting like a SIM. So we're not saying we're a replacement SIM. If you're going down the SIM path, that's fine. But we do have capabilities for a lightweight SIM within our technology as well. And then overall, the other key feature we deliver is intelligence automation. You might be collecting, you might be receiving threat intelligence today. You might have a feed of it, but you're probably not automating it to any large extent. Most people who have threat intel feeds are using it as a lookup, It's a passive source for context. You're looking up threats in them to see what does it mean, what could be expected next. And what we do instead is we consolidate all this threat intel and we use it to automatically provide protection within your network. This is applied intelligence, not just sitting there passive or reactive. So they're the key things that Clean Internet delivers. How do we do it? Where do we do it? What does it look like? Basically, we have solutions across the entire network infrastructure. First off, our appliances. These are typically 1 gig and 10 gig per bit per second network connections. They basically sit on the perimeter of your network outside your firewall, and they're protecting in-house assets, traditional IT environments. This is one reason, in fact, why our solution is very popular with universities, schools, healthcare facilities, anywhere that has a kind of a campus type of environment. And we drop in a Clean Internet appliance at the perimeter of the network and basically provides protection across the entire campus. We also have a solution now that provides the same protection. It is a cloud-based rule gate. So this protects your cloud-based infrastructure. So if you're moving your assets into the cloud, whether they be websites or application servers or databases or whatever else, whether it's in AWS or in Azure, we have protection capabilities there also. It's very fast to deploy and provides this very strong level of protection for those assets. If you happen to be running a data center, a large data center, maybe you have bigger pipes going into there, and we have appliances that actually scale up to 40 gig per second and 100 gig per second network connections. These are for the big boys. These devices operate at a phenomenal speeds, and they're there to protect this large scale private infrastructure. We also have solutions for virtual machine environments. If you're running large VMware environments, we have solutions for that also. And we have 2 new technologies coming down the pipe as well. One relates to DNS. This is where we take our threat intel feed and we use it to provide a highly secure DNS service. And this provides protection for all kinds of enterprises, but it's particularly valuable for smaller enterprises, in fact, and leverages the entirety of our threat intel assets, basically using that threat intel to filter DNS requests going out into the internet and also the DNS responses coming back to make sure the responses have not been poisoned. And then finally, Clean Internet Access is a technology we have coming down the pipe. We'll have it very, very soon. And this provides clean internet for all devices. So on your phone, on your laptop, on your iPad, whatever else, it uses SD-WAN technology and it pushes this clean internet capabilities out to remote workers. So that's coming soon. So what do we hear from our customers? Our customers are quite varied, quite diverse. We started out in the US Department of Defense, Homeland Security. That's where our technology was first tested and implemented, and still today protects those environments. When we went more commercial, some 5 or 6 years ago, we gained a lot of traction in universities, in schools, I mentioned, in healthcare environments, hospitals, manufacturing, a wide range of different environments. And today we're seeing that can continue. Our analysts work closely with the IT departments, and they deliver reports and meetings to kind of discuss the impact of our clean internet solution. They do that on a monthly basis, and we love the feedback that we get from our customers in that situation. You see some of them here. The one I like most here is down at the bottom. Every week there's another reason why we love you and the reason I sleep well at night. And that's really it. If we can reduce the amount of malicious traffic entering our customers' network, if we can reduce the amount of reconnaissance traffic, so the noise is greatly reduced, If we can help them to identify any assets in their environment that might be infected due to their behavior, then we inform them of that. And yes, the end result is that they get to sleep well at night, and we're a big supporter of that. So that's my story. That's the story of Clean Internet for today. If you do have any questions, I welcome. Certainly please send them in. I think Michael might have some for us, and Connor and Chris will happily take those questions. And I look forward to speaking with you all again.
Thank you very much, Fergal. And yes, indeed, there are a good few questions there, and there was a lot of, to be honest, which I thought was excellent. There was some very interesting setting the scene in terms of even the change of the landscape and how the internet has evolved, and some of those numbers that you mentioned earlier, the billions and whatever other sort of numbers, they're frightening, really. And when you think that this trade is bigger than the drugs trade, you think, well, it's a big business, and that's for sure. And we certainly see that in Ireland with a lot of the customers that we deal with out there in Ireland, the partners and channel that we work with, that it's becoming a bigger problem for everybody. But there are a bunch of questions here. Yeah, I know you touched on there's one question here, but and I know you touched on this a number of times. It's probably just worth focusing on this. But doesn't my next gen firewall do this? You know, do I not have something doing this already? In other words, I guess.
I'm going to hand that one over to Chris. He's the expert on this.
Thank you. Yes, to an extent, a next-gen firewall does consume, as Fergal touched on throughout the presentation, threat intelligence to a degree. And there are, to give credit, varying levels, a small scale of automated rule set updating. The key difference is that firewalls were designed for the purpose of being closed and opened, ready for traffic to come in at will, at leisure. And they were built with very specific CPU components, capable of handling somewhere between 100 and 200,000 active rules. And that's sort of the key difference with our solution, especially our on-premise deployment, is that we've designed everything from the ground up purely for the purposes of ingesting so much data, processing at such speed that we can work with 10 billion actively updated rule set pieces in real time.
You make it sound like 10 billion is a lot, Chris. Well done. In fact, the numbers are sort of quite vast, actually, because there was another number that I know that Fergal mentioned out there, which I thought was very interesting as well. When you look at all those threat intel engines, if you like, that there was a relatively small overlap. It was a 3% overlap between those providers, which I thought was fascinating, because we would probably look at some of those threat intel engines and people we know might have them deployed from time to time and think that they're in good shape. But are you suggesting ultimately that you need that breadth and depth to really get the best possible view? Would that be fair?
Absolutely.
We definitely to be effective at what we do, we need multiple sources. We have great relationships, great partnerships with our threat intel sources, but they each use different techniques. So they will have strengths and weaknesses in different areas. It's only the combination of it all that really brings the real strength of threat intel to its full effect.
So in effect, nobody else can really, I suppose, leverage to the extent that you do in the automation and the integration.
It would be an enormous challenge for anyone to come even close, yes. And definitely no end user type customer could. There's no way a single business would subscribe to 200 different threat intel sources. One single threat intel source is typically around about 250 grand a year. They're very expensive, very, very expensive. So, yeah. Let us look at that, and then we apply it, giving you the value. That's really what it comes down to.
And one of the questions here is, and I guess this comes down to the number of threat intel feeds. What's the impact of inline real-time traffic inspection to response times? What's the latency challenge, I guess?
Absolutely, I'll take that one. So yeah, very little in a short answer, but for a more technical answer, the way that we sit in line, we come the wire, and we then begin our inspection routines at varying levels. We would expect to see for a regular inspection 50 microseconds added, which is an incredibly small number. And in the event that we need to go to full deep packet inspection, you're still talking about response times lower than a millisecond on average.
Fast, I think it's the word then. Okay. And how is the tool set licensed?
Sure, I'll take that one. So it's a subscription-based solution model, and just in terms of the pricing, we would generally look at the size of the pipe, and then also the egress and ingress nodes, and then typically whether it's on-prem or cloud, and that sizing, it can start from anywhere from 40 or 50K.
So it's not you don't have to be that university to afford this type of technology.
Exactly.
Okay, and one slide referred to elite cyber threat analysts. Where do they reside?
So we have a team of cyber threat analysts in the US, and we also have a team here in Galway. And in fact, we're building out our Galway team. We have some great analysts here, and we expect the team here to grow quite significantly over the coming years. Yeah, here and in the US.
Yes.
We also have a couple of other guys dotted around more internationally. We have a guy in Venezuela and a guy in where's the other guy? In the BVIs. So they are spread out quite vastly. But the team managing Ireland is here in Galway.
Excellent. And the question then about that well-known international group, Gartner. Are there any endorsements from industry advisors like Gartner or Forrester or analysts like that?
Yeah, we do. I'm happy to share that with the attendees afterwards. I have a very interesting document from ESG, which is another one of those type of groups, and that they do a very deep dive on our technology, and I'm happy to share that.
Excuse me, that can be delivered as a follow-up to this. And there's a question about threat feeds already, and perhaps I guess this is covered, but to some extent, but maybe just to clarify it again, I have a threat feed already. What is different? I guess it's the breadth and depth of the threat feeds that you have available to you.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
take
see
that.
yeah.
So as we touched on with even the ability, and it goes back to the previous point of, well, can I get this? Yes, you could theoretically go out and purchase all of the threat information that is commercially available, but you're limited then to how much of it your firewall or your system at the moment can process. So the vast amount of threat intelligence out there means that you're consuming one feed. It may have the indicators of compromise relevant to that attack, or it may not. And there's a considerable update time. There's somewhere in the region of 5 days for major exploits. So you're taking a 1 in several hundred chance on subscribing to the correct feed. And so by utilizing all of them, there's really nothing left out. To your point on that 3 or 4% overlap there, that's what we're really seeing. So if that answers that.
And that therefore ultimately reduces your attack surface massively, I guess.
Absolutely right, because you're relying on one provider, 2 providers, 3 providers. They are great individually; they're doing a fantastic job, but they are relying on somewhere to source that information from. It may be in-house, it may be another threat provider, and so yes, by utilizing all of them, you're really you're closing the doors.
And it's the integration and automation, I suppose, is the secret sauce. Is that right?
That's right. You're not responding on a manual basis, as was touched on by Fergal earlier on. In the history of these solutions, you would see a threat, it would enter, you would respond to it. You'd update your firewall, you'd update your rules, and so by having that iterative change, whereby we see the threat coming, we prevent against it, and we prevent against future occurrences, we're really removing those steps from freeing up a lot of sysadmin time. It's fair to say.
So it's not a resource hungry or anything like that, or it releases resources effectively.
Yes, quite the opposite indeed. So from a human perspective, we've got the downstream impacts of sysadmin time, network engineer time, no longer reviewing complicated logs on firewalls, IDS systems, as well as any existing analysts or people who are wearing all of those hats, no longer having to traverse through reconnaissance traffic, log traffic. They're receiving from us on a curated basis only the most relevant information, and we're sending a report that says, hey, we've stopped this. this is what you need to look into. Additionally, the hardware downstream impacts are also, sometimes severe because our solution is sitting at the edge of the network. Everything downstream, firewall systems, IDS systems, they're all going to see a marked reduction in CPU consumption and otherwise.
Excellent. And I guess one I thought was very interesting, that slide, Fergal, that you did in terms of the the anatomy of the timelines of the processes around that. I guess by having all those thread feeds and that constant updating and that iterative type of process, that you're much better protected than you could ever realistically be in a do-it-yourself type environment.
Yeah, if you consider the way that organizations are being impacted today by these vulnerabilities, they're of course keen to patch their systems as soon as they're made aware of vulnerabilities, but that takes time. There are processes around that, and indeed there might be situations where they can't take down a system because it's mission critical, and they need to find this service window during which they can take down, which could be a month away. So they're sitting there with this vulnerable system sitting on their network. They know that there are attackers out there. It's been reported every single day, but they haven't been able to manage to patch that system. Create a layer of defense outside of that, that's aware of the source of every single one of the attacks that have happened to this point. That gives a tremendous level of confidence, a tremendous boost for any organization.
And there's one question just popped in here, which is an interesting question to ask on an event, but I'll throw it out to you anyway. Who are the primary competitors, and how does Centripetal differentiate? Are the unique aspects, I guess, of the solution, or are the questions there?
Oh, it's an interesting question. We believe our technology to be quite unique, really, but of course, it would be with hubris if we said that there was no competitors. But it becomes a question of where people want to spend their cybersecurity investment. And there are solutions out there that provide protection at different layers that could maybe achieve the same end result, but they tend to be very expensive. Also, yes, you could deploy, an enormous firewall with IDS cards and these threat intel feeds, and maybe you're not going to come close to the level of protection, but that tends to be where companies might spend their dollars instead. We believe we have a unique story, and there really is no other company out there that will be doing things in exactly the same way that we are. We have patented technology across the board here. Our research teams have patented an awful lot of this, and that's why it's taken 20 years of investment in research to get us to this point. So yes, it's a difficult wall to climb, shall we say.
It's interesting when you excuse me, when you mention that, because obviously Renaissance, we get exposed to lots of global technologies out there, and it's always interesting for us to find the ones that we think are the most appropriate and can provide the most benefit ultimately to our customers and to their customers, so that everybody gets value out of it. And I think from what you're saying there, the things that jump into my mind are the three competitors ultimately are budget, resource, and time. Yeah, you can do all these things if you wish, but this is a way of doing it in a sensible, economical, and timely manner. So it's available, and I think I've no other open questions, and I think just maybe give everybody a couple of minutes back. But I think that the follow up from this will be that if anybody has any questions, if they wish to raise any questions, they can come any member of the Renaissance team or come to any of the members of the Centripetal team. We'll do a follow up in relation to this. We'll do a follow up in relation to this. We'll send people on the link to the downloaded version of this and the recorded version of this, so that everybody, if they wish to use it internally or whatever, we can take it on board from there, and we can follow it up. There is one last question, if I can throw it out there. Sorry, it's popped up here. who manages firewalls? The network teams. So who manages the concerns between Centripetal inline appliances and the firewalls?
Chris, you got that one?
Yeah, I'll take that. So in every deployment, as we build a policy that's bespoke to each deployment, each business, we review their unique concerns, business as usual requirements. So certainly things such as false positives are a non-issue. Now, because we build things that way, we become aware of what you're looking for downstream. So we're looking to remove harm from the wire. We're not necessarily a policy engine. We're not going to impact things there. We do have a team of NetOps resources who are available for network integration, so they would be a primary contact point. But I just thought I would throw that in if that answers your question, Howard.
And just one more point on that, Chris, is that those network ops resources are also here in Galway, and that team is being expanded also.
So listen, thank you very much, everybody, for the questions, and thanks very much to the panelists for taking those questions. Really appreciate your time today. I know everybody has lots of other things to do, but we'll get you the link to the recorded copy of this, so you can look at this through again, and indeed, as I say, share it, and we'll follow up with you all afterwards to make sure that you have the relevant information. I think there's some resources that Fergus going to make available in the follow-up also, and please, as I say, reach out to any of the Renaissance or Centripetal team, and thank you very much, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.